What is done out of love always takes place beyond good and evil. Objection, evasion, joyous distrust, and love of irony are signs of health. Everything absolute belongs to pathology. The sense of the tragic increases and declines with sensuousness. Insanity in individuals is something rare, but in groups, parties, nations, and epochs it is the rule. The thought of suicide is a great consolation. By means of it, one gets successfully through many a bad night. Not only our reason, but also our conscience, truckles to our strongest impulse, the tyrant in us. One must repay good and ill, but why just to the person who did us good or ill? One no longer loves one's knowledge sufficiently after one has communicated it. Poets act shamelessly towards their experiences. They exploit them. Our fellow creature is not our neighbor, but our neighbor's neighbor. So thinks every nation. Love brings to light the noble and hidden qualities of a lover, his rare and exceptional traits. It is thus liable to be deceptive as to his normal character. Jesus said to his Jews, "The law was for servants. Love God as I love him, as his son." What have we sons of God to do with morals? In sight of every party. A shepherd has always need of a bellwether, or he has himself to be a wether occasionally. One may indeed lie with the mouth, but with the accompanying grimace, one nevertheless tells the truth. To vigorous men, intimacy is a matter of shame and something precious. Christianity gave Eros poison to drink. He did not die of it, certainly, but degenerated to vice. To talk much about oneself may also be a means of concealing oneself. In praise, there is more obtrusiveness than in blame. Pity has an almost ludicrous effect on a man of knowledge, like tender hands on a cyclops. One occasionally embraces someone or other out of love to mankind, because one cannot embrace all. But this is what one must never confess to the individual. One does not hate as long as one disesteems, but only when one esteems equal or superior. Ye utilitarians, ye too love the utile only as a vehicle for your inclinations, ye too really find the noise of its wheels insupportable. One loves ultimately one's desires, not the thing desired. The vanity of others is only counter to our taste when it is counter to our vanity. With regard to what truthfulness is, perhaps nobody has ever been sufficiently truthful. One does not believe in the follies of clever men. What a forfeiture of the rights of man! The consequences of our actions seize us by the forelock, very indifferent to the fact that we have meanwhile reformed. There is an innocence in lying which is the sign of good faith in a cause. It is inhuman to bless when one is being cursed. The familiarity of superiors embitters one, because it may not be returned. I am affected, not because you have deceived me, but because I can no longer believe in you. There is a haughtiness of kindness which has the appearance of wickedness. I dislike him. Why? I am not a match for him. Did anyone ever answer so? Zarathustra, however, looked at the people and wondered. Then he spake thus: Man is a rope stretched between the animal and the Superman, a rope over an abyss, a dangerous crossing, a dangerous wayfaring, a dangerous looking back, a dangerous trembling and halting. What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not a goal. What is lovable in man is that he is an overgoing and a downgoing. I love those that know not how to live except as downgoers, for they are the overgoers. I love the great despisers because they are the great adorers and arrows of longing for the other shore. I love those who do not first seek a reason beyond the stars for going down and being sacrifices, but sacrifice themselves to the earth, that the earth of the Superman may hereafter arrive. I love him who liveth in order to know, and seeketh to know in order that the Superman may hereafter live. Thus seeketh he his own down-going. I love him who laboureth and inventeth that he may build the house for the Superman and prepare for him earth, animal, and plant, for thus seeketh he his own downgoing. I love him who loveth his virtue, for virtue is the will to downgoing, and an arrow of longing. I love him who reserveth no share of spirit for himself, but wanteth to be wholly the spirit of his virtue. Thus walketh he as spirit over the bridge. I love him who maketh his virtue his inclination and destiny. Thus, for the sake of his virtue, he is willing to live on or live no more. I love him who desireth not too many virtues. One virtue is more of a virtue than two, because it is more of a knot for one's destiny to cling to. I love him whose soul is lavish, who wanteth no thanks and doth not give back, for he always bestoweth and desireth not to keep for himself. I love him who is ashamed when the dice fall in his favor, and who then asketh, "Am I a dishonest player?" For he is willing to succumb. I love him who scattereth golden words in advance of his deeds, and always doeth more than he promiseth, for he seeketh his own downgoing. I love him who justifieth the future ones, and redeemeth the past ones, for he is willing to succumb through the present ones. I love him who chasteneth his God, because he loveth his God, for he must succumb through the wrath of his God. I love him whose soul is deep, even in the wounding, and may succumb through a small matter. Thus goeth he willingly over the bridge. I love him whose soul is so overfull that he forgetteth himself, and all things are in him. Thus all things become his downgoing. I love him who is of a free spirit and a free heart. Thus is his head only the bowels of his heart. His heart, however, causeth his downgoing. I love all who are like heavy drops falling one by one out of the dark cloud that lowereth over man. They herald the coming of the lightning and succumb as heralds. Lo, I am a herald of the lightning and a heavy drop out of the cloud. The lightning, however, is the Superman. At the risk that moralizing may also reveal itself here as that which it has always been, namely, resolutely Montra SES plays, according to Balzac, I would venture to protest against an improper and injurious alteration of rank, which quite unnoticed, and as if with the best conscience, threatens nowadays to establish itself in the relations of science and philosophy. I mean to say that one must have the right out of one's own experience. Experience, as it seems to me, always implies unfortunate experience. To treat of such an important question of rank, so as not to speak of color like the blind, or against science like women and artists. Ah, this dreadful science, sigh their instinct and their shame, it always finds things. Out. The Declaration of Independence of the scientific man, his emancipation from philosophy, is one of the subtler after-effects of democratic organization and disorganization. The self-glorification and self-conceitedness of the learned man is now everywhere in full bloom and in its best springtime, which does not mean to imply that in this case self-praise smells sweet. Here also the instinct of the populace cries, "Freedom from all masters." And after science has, with the happiest results, resisted theology, whose handmaid it had been too long, it now proposes in its wantonness and indiscretion to lay down laws for philosophy, and in its turn to play the master. What am I saying? To play the philosopher on its own account. My memory, the memory of a scientific man, if you please, teems with the naivetés of insolence which I have heard about philosophy and philosophers from young naturalists and old physicians, not to mention the most cultured and most conceited of all learned men, the philologists and schoolmasters, who are both the one and the other by profession. On one occasion, it was the specialist and the Jack Horner who instinctively stood on the defensive against all synthetic tasks and capabilities. At another time, it was the industrious worker who had got a scent of otium and refined luxuriousness in the internal economy of the philosopher. and felt himself aggrieved and belittled thereby. On another occasion, it was the color blindness of the utilitarian, who sees nothing in philosophy but a series of refuted systems and an extravagant expenditure which does nobody any good. At another time, the fear of disguised mysticism and of the boundary adjustment of knowledge became conspicuous. At another time, the disregard of individual philosophers, which had involuntarily extended to disregard of philosophy generally. In fine, I found most frequently behind the proud disdain of philosophy in young scholars the evil after effect of some particular philosopher to whom on the whole obedience had been forsworn, without, however, the spell of his scornful estimates of other philosophers having been got rid of, the result being a general ill will to all philosophy. Such seems to me, for instance, the after effect of Schopenhauer on the most modern Germany. By his unintelligent rage against Hegel, he has succeeded in severing the whole of the last generation of Germans from its connection with German culture, which culture, all things considered, has been an elevation and a divining refinement of the historical sense. But precisely at this point, Schopenhauer himself was poor, irreceptive, and un-German to the extent of ingenuousness. On the whole, speaking generally, it may just have been the humanness, all too humanness of the modern philosophers themselves, in short, their contemptibleness, which has injured most radically the reverence for philosophy and opened the doors to the instinct of the populace. Let it but be acknowledged to what an extent our modern world diverges from the whole style of the world of Heraclitus, Plato, Empedocles, and whatever else all the royal and magnificent anchorites of the spirit were called, and with what justice an honest man of science may feel himself of a better family and origin in view of such representatives of philosophy who, owing to the fashion of the present day, are just as much aloft as they are down below. In Germany, for instance, the two lions of Berlin, the anarchist Eugen Dühring and the amalgamist Eduard von Hartmann. It is especially the sight of those hodgepodge philosophers who call themselves realists or positivists, which is calculated to implant a dangerous distrust in the soul of a young and ambitious scholar. Those philosophers, at the best, are themselves but scholars and specialists. That is very evident. All of them are persons who have been vanquished and brought back. Again, under the dominion of science, who at one time or another claimed more from themselves without having a right to the more and its responsibility, and who now, creditably, rancorously, and vindictively, represent in word and deed disbelief in the master task and supremacy of philosophy. After all, how could it be otherwise? Science flourishes nowadays and has the good conscience clearly visible on its countenance, while that to which the entire modern philosophy has gradually sunk, the remnant of philosophy of the present day, excites distrust and displeasure, if not scorn and pity. Philosophy reduced to a theory of knowledge, no more in fact than a diffident science of epochs and doctrine of forbearance, a philosophy that never even gets beyond the threshold and rigorously denies itself the right to enter. That is philosophy in its last throes, an end, an agony, something that awakens pity. How could such a philosophy rule? The importance of language for the development of culture lies in the fact that in language, man has placed a world of his own beside the other, a position which he deemed so fixed that he might therefrom lift the rest of the world off its hinges and make himself master of it. Inasmuch as man has believed in the ideas and names of things as eterni veritates for a great length of time, he has acquired that pride by which he has raised himself above the animal. He really thought that in language he possessed the knowledge of the world. The maker of language was not modest enough to think that he only gave designations to things. He believed, rather, that with his words he expressed the widest knowledge of the things. In reality, language is the first step in the endeavor after science. Here also it is belief in ascertained truth, from which the mightiest sources of strength have flowed. Much later, only now, it is dawning upon men that they have propagated a tremendous error in their belief in language. Fortunately, it is now too late to reverse the development of reason, which is founded upon that belief. Logic also is founded upon suppositions to which nothing in the actual world corresponds, for instance, on the supposition of the equality of things and the identity of the same thing at different points of time. But that particular science arose out of the contrary belief that such things really existed in the actual world. It is the same with mathematics, which would certainly not have arisen if it had been known from the beginning that in nature there are no exactly straight lines, no real circle, no absolute standard of size. He who is a thorough teacher takes things seriously, and even himself, only in relation to his pupils. Knowledge for its own sake, that is the last snare laid by morality. We are thereby completely entangled in morals once more. The charm of knowledge would be small, were it not so much shame has to be overcome on the way to it. We are most dishonorable towards our God. He is not permitted to sin. The tendency of a person to allow himself to be degraded, robbed, deceived, and exploited might be the diffidence of a God among men. Love to one only is a barbarity, for it is exercised at the expense of all others. Love to God also. I did that, says my memory. I could not have done that, says my pride, and remains inexorable. Eventually, the memory yields. One has regarded life carelessly if one has failed to see the hand that kills with leniency. If a man has character, he has also his typical experience, which always recurs. The sage as astronomer. So long as thou feelest the stars as an above thee, thou lackest the eye of the discerning one. It is not the strength, but the duration of great sentiments that makes great men. He who attains his ideal precisely thereby surpasses it. Many a peacock hides his tail from every eye and calls it his pride. A man of genius is unbearable unless he possess at least two things besides: gratitude and purity. The dangers that beset the evolution of the philosopher are in fact so manifold nowadays that one might doubt whether this fruit could still come to maturity. The extent and towering structure of the sciences have increased enormously, and therewith also the probability that the philosopher will grow tired even as a learner, or will attach himself somewhere and specialize so that he will no longer attain to his elevation, that is to say, to his superspection, his circumspection, and his dispection. Or he gets aloft too late, when the best of his maturity and strength is past, or when he is impaired, coarsened, and deteriorated, so that his view, his general estimate of things, is no longer of much importance. It is perhaps just the refinement of his intellectual conscience that makes him hesitate and linger on the way. He dreads the temptation to become a dilettante, a millipede, a million tenor. He knows too well that as a discerner, one who has lost his self-respect no longer commands, no longer leads, unless he should aspire to become a great play actor, a philosophical Cagliostro, and spiritual rat-catcher. In short, a misleader. This is in the last instance a question of taste, if it has not really been a question of conscience. To double once more the philosopher's difficulties, there is also the fact that he demands from himself a verdict, a yea or nay, not concerning science, but concerning life and the worth of life. He learns unwillingly to believe that it is his right and even his duty to obtain this verdict, and he has to seek his way to the right and the belief only through the most extensive, perhaps disturbing and destroying experiences, often hesitating, doubting, and dumbfounded. In fact, the philosopher has long been mistaken and confused by the multitude, either with the scientific man and ideal scholar, or with the religiously elevated, desensualized, desecularized visionary and God-intoxicated man. And even yet, when one hears anybody praised because he lives wisely or as a philosopher, it hardly means anything more than prudently and apart. Wisdom. That seems to the populace to be a kind of flight, a means and artifice for withdrawing successfully from a bad game. But the genuine philosopher, does it not seem so to us, my friends, lives unphilosophically and unwisely, above all imprudently, and feels the obligation and burden of 100 attempts and temptations of life. He risks himself constantly. He plays this bad game. As Democritus transferred the concepts above and below to endless space where they have no sense, so philosophers in general have transferred the concepts internal and external to the essence and appearance of the world. They think that with deep feelings, one can penetrate deeply into the internal and approach the heart of nature. But these feelings are only deep insofar as along with them, barely noticeable certain complicated groups of thoughts, which we call deep, are regularly excited. A feeling is deep because we think that the accompanying thought is deep. But the deep thought can nevertheless be very far from the truth, as, for instance, every metaphysical one. If one take away from the deep feeling the commingled elements of thought, then the strong feeling remains, and this guarantees nothing for knowledge but itself, just as strong faith proves only its strength and not the truth of what is believed in. In relation to the genius, that is to say, a being who either engenders or produces, both words understood in their fullest sense, the man of learning, the scientific average man, has always something of the old maid about him, for like her, he is not conversant with the two principal functions of man. To both, of course, to the scholar and to the old maid, one concedes respectability, as if by way of indemnification. In these cases, one emphasizes the respectability, and yet, in the compulsion of this concession, one has the same admixture of vexation. Let us examine more closely. What is the scientific man? Firstly, a commonplace type of man with commonplace virtues, that is to say, a non-ruling, non-authoritative, and non-self-sufficient type of man. He possesses industry, patient adaptableness to rank and file, equability and moderation in capacity and requirement. He has the instinct for people like himself and for that which they require. For instance, the portion of independence and green meadow without which there is no rest from labor, the claim to honor and consideration, which first and foremost presupposes recognition and recognizability, the sunshine of a good name, the perpetual ratification of his value and usefulness, with which the inward distrust, which lies at the bottom of the heart of all dependent men and gregarious animals, has again and again to be overcome. The learned man, as is appropriate, has also maladies and faults of an ignoble kind. He is full of petty envy and has a lynx eye for the weak points in those natures to whose elevations he cannot attain. He is confiding, yet only as one who lets himself go, but does not flow. And precisely before the man of the great current, he stands all the colder and more reserved. His eye is then like a smooth and irresponsive lake, which is no longer moved by rapture or sympathy. The worst and most dangerous thing of which a scholar is capable results from the instinct of mediocrity of his type, from the Jesuitism of mediocrity, which labors instinctively for the destruction of the exceptional man and endeavors to break, or still better, to relax, every bent bow to relax, of course, with consideration, and naturally with an indulgent hand, to relax with confiding sympathy. That is the real art of Jesuitism, which has always understood how to introduce itself as the religion of sympathy. A degree of culture, and assuredly a very high one, is attained when man rises above superstitious and religious notions and fears, and for instance, no longer believes in guardian angels or in original sin, and has also ceased to talk of the salvation of his soul. If he has attained to this degree of freedom, he has still also to overcome metaphysics with the greatest exertion of his intelligence. Then, however, a retrogressive movement is necessary. He must understand the historical justification as well as the psychological in such representations. He must recognize how the greatest advancement of humanity has come therefrom, and how, without such a retrocursive movement, we should have been robbed of the best products of hitherto existing mankind. With regard to philosophical metaphysics, I always see increasing numbers who have attained to the negative goal, that all positive metaphysics is error, but as yet few who climb a few rungs backwards. One ought to look out perhaps over the last steps of the ladder, but not try to stand upon them. The most enlightened only succeed so far as to free themselves from metaphysics and look back upon it with superiority, while it is necessary here too, as in the hippodrome, to turn round the end of the course. The degree and nature of a man's sensuality extends to the highest altitudes of his spirit. Under peaceful conditions, the militant man attacks himself. With his principles, a man seeks either to dominate or justify, or honor or reproach, or conceal his habits. Two men with the same principles probably seek fundamentally different ends therewith. He who despises himself nevertheless esteems himself thereby as a despiser. A soul which knows that it is love, but does not itself love, betrays its sediment. Its dregs come up. A thing that is explained ceases to concern us. What did the God mean who gave the advice, "Know thyself"? Did it perhaps imply, cease to be concerned about thyself, become objective? And Socrates, and the scientific man. It is terrible to die of thirst at sea. Is it necessary that you should so salt your truth that it will no longer quench thirst? Sympathy for all would be harshness and tyranny for thee, my good neighbor. Instinct, when the house is on fire, one forgets even the dinner, yes, but one recovers it from among the ashes. Woman learns how to hate in proportion as she forgets how to charm. The same emotions are in man and woman, but in different tempo. On that account, man and woman never cease to misunderstand each other. In the background of all their personal vanity, women themselves have still their impersonal scorn for woman, fettered heart, free spirit. When one firmly fetters one's heart and keeps it prisoner, one can allow one's spirit many liberties. I said this once before, but people do not believe it when I say so, unless they know it already. One begins to distrust very clever persons when they become embarrassed. Dreadful experiences raise the question whether he who experiences them is not something dreadful also. Heavy, melancholy men turn lighter and come temporarily to their surface, precisely by that which makes others heavy, by hatred and love. So cold, so icy, that one burns one's finger at the touch of him. Every hand that lays hold of him shrinks back, and for that very reason, many think him red hot. Who has not, at one time or another, sacrificed himself for the sake of his good name? In affability there is no hatred of men, but precisely on that account a great deal too much contempt of men. The maturity of man, that means to have reacquired the seriousness that one had as a child at play. To be ashamed of one's immorality is a step on the ladder at the end of which one is ashamed also of one's morality. One should part from life as Ulysses parted from Nausicaa, blessing it rather than in love with it. What? A great man? I always see merely the play actor of his own ideal. When one trains one's conscience, it kisses one while it bites. The disappointed one speaks. I listened for the echo, and I heard only praise. We all feign to ourselves that we are simpler than we are. We thus relax ourselves away from our fellows. He who fights with monsters should be careful, lest he thereby become a monster. And if thou gaze long into an abyss, the abyss will also gaze into thee. To seduce their neighbor to a favorable opinion, and afterwards to believe implicitly in this opinion of their neighbor, who can do this conjuring trick so well as women? That which an age considers evil is usually an unseasonable echo of what was formerly considered good, the atavism of an old ideal. Around the hero, everything becomes a tragedy. Around the demigod, everything becomes a satyr play. And around God, everything becomes what? Perhaps a world. It is not enough to possess a talent. One must also have your permission to possess it. Eh, my friends? Where there is the tree of knowledge, there is always paradise. So say the most ancient and the most modern serpents. The beast in us wishes to be deceived. Morality is a lie of necessity in order that we may not be torn in pieces by it. Without the errors which lie in the assumption of morality, man would have remained an animal. Thus, however, he has considered himself as something higher and has laid strict laws upon himself. Therefore, he hates the grades which have remained nearer to animalness, whereby the former scorn of the slave, as a not yet man, is to be explained as a fact. However gratefully one may welcome the objective spirit, and who has not been sick to death of all subjectivity and its confounded ipsismosity, in the end, however, one must learn caution even with regard to one's gratitude, and put a stop to the exaggeration with which the unselfing and depersonalizing of the spirit has recently been celebrated, as if it were the goal in itself, as if it were salvation and glorification. As is especially accustomed to happen in the pessimist school, which has also in its turn good reasons for paying the highest honors to disinterested knowledge. The objective man, who no longer curses and scolds like the pessimist, the ideal man of learning, in whom the scientific instinct blossoms forth fully after 1,000 complete and partial failures, is assuredly one of the most costly instruments that exist, but his place is in the hand of one who is more powerful. He is only an instrument, we may say. He is a mirror. He is no purpose in himself. The objective man is in truth a mirror accustomed to prostration before everything that wants to be known, with such desires only as knowing or reflecting implies. He waits until something comes, and then expands himself sensitively, so that even the light footsteps and gliding past of spiritual beings may not be lost on his surface and film. Whatever personality he still possesses seems to him accidental, arbitrary, or still oftener, disturbing. So much has he come to regard himself as the passage and reflection of outside forms and events. He calls up the recollection of himself with an effort, and not infrequently wrongly, he readily confounds himself with other persons. He makes mistakes with regard to his own needs, and here only is he unrefined and negligent. Perhaps he is troubled about the health, or the pettiness and confined atmosphere of wife and friend, or the lack of companions and society. Indeed, he sets himself to reflect on his suffering, but in vain. His thoughts already rove away to the more general case, and tomorrow he knows as little as he knew yesterday how to help himself. He does not now take himself seriously and devote time to himself. He is serene, not from lack of trouble, but from lack of capacity for grasping and dealing with his trouble. The habitual complacence with respect to all objects and experiences, the radiant and impartial hospitality with which he receives everything that comes his way, his habit of inconsiderate good nature, of dangerous indifference as to yea and nay. Alas, there are enough of cases in which he has to atone for these virtues of his, and as man generally, he becomes far too easily the caput mortuum of such virtues. Should one wish love or hatred from him, I mean love and hatred as God, woman, and animal understand them, he will do what he can, and furnish what he can. But one must not be surprised if it should not be much, if he should show himself just at this point to be false, fragile, questionable, and deteriorated. His love is constrained, his hatred is artificial, and rather un tour de force, a slight ostentation and exaggeration. He is only genuine so far as he can be objective. Only in his serene totality is he still nature and natural. His mirroring and eternally self-polishing soul no longer knows how to affirm, no longer how to deny. He does not command, neither does he destroy. Je ne méprise presque rien, he says with Leibniz. Let us not overlook nor undervalue the presque. Neither is he a model man. He does not go in advance of anyone, nor after either. He places himself generally too far off to have any reason for espousing the cause of either good or evil. If he has been so long confounded with the philosopher, with the Caesarean trainer and dictator of civilization, he has had far too much honor, and what is more essential in him has been overlooked. He is an instrument, something of a slave, though certainly the sublimest sort of slave, but nothing in himself, presque, rien. The objective man is an instrument, a costly, easily injured, easily tarnished measuring instrument and mirroring apparatus, which is to be taken care of and respected. But he is no goal, not outgoing nor upgoing, no complementary man in whom the rest of existence justifies itself, no termination, and still less a commencement, an engendering or primary cause, nothing hardy, powerful, self-centered that wants to be master, but rather only a soft, inflated, delicate, movable potter's form that must wait for some kind of content and frame to shape itself thereto. For the most part, a man without frame and content, a selfless man. Consequently also, nothing for women, in parenthesi. People who are cruel nowadays must be accounted for by us as the grades of earlier civilizations which have survived. Here are exposed those deeper formations in the mountain of humanity which usually remain concealed. They are backward people whose brains, through all manner of accidents in the course of inheritance, have not been developed in so delicate and manifold a way. They show us what we all were and horrify us, but they themselves are as little responsible as is a block of granite for being granite. There must, too, be grooves and twists in our brains which answer to that condition of mind. As in the form of certain human organs, there are supposed to be traces of a fish state. But these grooves and twists are no longer the bed through which the stream of our sensation flows. A discerning one might easily regard himself at present as the animalization of God. Discovering reciprocal love should really disenchant the lover with regard to the beloved. What? She is modest enough to love even you, or stupid enough, or the danger in happiness. Everything now turns out best for me. I now love every fate. Who would like to be my fate? Not their love of humanity, but the impotence of their love prevents the Christians of today burning us. The Pia Fraus is still more repugnant to the taste, the piety of the free spirit, the pious man of knowledge, than the impia Fraus. Hence the profound lack of judgment in comparison with the Church, characteristic of the type free spirit, as its non-freedom. By means of music, the very passions enjoy themselves. A sign of strong character, when once the resolution has been taken to shut the ear even to the best counter-arguments. Occasionally, therefore, a will to stupidity. There is no such thing as moral phenomena, but only a moral interpretation of phenomena. The criminal is often enough not equal to his deed. He extenuates and maligns it. The advocates of a criminal are seldom artists enough to turn the beautiful terribleness of the deed to the advantage of the doer. Our vanity is most difficult to wound, just when our pride has been wounded. The conception of good and evil has a twofold early history. namely, once in the soul of the ruling tribes and castes. Whoever has the power of returning good for good, evil for evil, and really practices requital, and who is, therefore, grateful and revengeful, is called good. Whoever is powerless and unable to requite is reckoned as bad. As a good man, one is reckoned among the good, a community which has common feelings because the single individuals are bound to one another by the sense of requital. As a bad man, one belongs to the bad, to a party of subordinate, powerless people who have no common feeling. The good are a caste, the bad are a mass like dust. Good and bad have for a long time meant the same thing as noble and base, master and slave. On the other hand, the enemy is not looked upon as evil he can requite. In Homer, the Trojan and the Greek are both good. It is not the one who injures us, but the one who is despicable, who is called bad. Good is inherited in the community of the good. It is impossible that a bad man could spring from such good soil. If nevertheless, one of the good ones does something which is unworthy of the good, refuge is sought in excuses. The guilt is thrown upon a god, for instance. It is said that he has struck the good man with blindness and madness. Then, in the soul of the oppressed and powerless. Here every other man is looked upon as hostile, inconsiderate, rapacious, cruel, cunning, be he noble or base. Evil is the distinguishing word for man, even for every conceivable living creature, for example, for a god. Human, divine, is the same thing as devilish, evil. The signs of goodness, helpfulness, pity are looked upon with fear as spite, the prelude to a terrible result, stupefaction and outwitting, in short, as refined malice. With such a disposition in the individual, a community could hardly exist, or at most, it could exist only in its crudest form, so that in all places where this conception of good and evil obtains, the downfall of the single individuals of their tribes and races is at hand. Our present civilization has grown up on the soil of the ruling tribes and castes. The sexes deceive themselves about each other. The reason is that in reality they honor and love only themselves or their own ideal, to express it more agreeably. Thus, man wishes woman to be peaceable, but in fact, woman is essentially unpeaceable, like the cat, however well she may have assumed the peaceable demeanor. One is punished best for one's virtues. He who cannot find the way to his ideal lives more frivolously and shamelessly than the man without an ideal. From the senses originate all trustworthiness, all good conscience, all evidence of truth. Pharisaism is not a deterioration of the good man. A considerable part of it is rather an essential condition of being good. The one seeks an accoucheur for his thoughts, the other seeks someone whom he can assist. A good conversation thus originates. In intercourse with scholars and artists, one readily makes mistakes of opposite kinds. In a remarkable scholar, one not infrequently finds a mediocre man. And often, even in a mediocre artist, one finds a very remarkable man. We do the same when awake as when dreaming. We only invent and imagine him with whom we have intercourse and forget it immediately. In revenge and in love, woman is more barbarous than man. Advice as a riddle. If the band is not to break, bite it first, secure to make. The belly is the reason why man does not so readily take himself for a god. The chastest utterance I ever heard. Dans le véritable amour, c'est l'âme qui enveloppe le corps. Our vanity would like what we do best to pass precisely for what is most difficult to us, concerning the origin of many systems of morals. When a woman has scholarly inclinations, there is generally something wrong with her sexual nature. Barrenness itself conduces to a certain virility of taste. Man, indeed, if I may say so, is the barren animal. Comparing man and woman generally, one may say that woman would not have the genius for adornment. if she had not the instinct for the secondary role, and thus forward upon the path of wisdom with a firm step and good confidence. However you may be situated, serve yourself as a source of experience. Throw off the displeasure at your nature, forgive yourself your own individuality, for in any case, you have in yourself a ladder with 100 steps upon which you can mount to knowledge. The age into which with grief you feel yourself thrown thinks you happy because of this good fortune. It calls out to you that you shall still have experiences which men of later ages will perhaps be obliged to forego.